saw increases in public works as well as community development towards the end of the year. This note here says that we're sensitive to year-end processes. At this point, we won't see that much change here, but if we were maybe a couple months earlier, we might see a little bit more movement. So that comment right at this point is not as important as it would have been maybe 2 months ago. Property tax is less than $100,000 from what our original estimate was. Same thing with our franchise fees within about $100,000. And then within our transfers in, less than $100,000 there. Transfers in include things such as our indirect costs from our utilities, property in lieu from our utilities as well, and franchise fees in lieu from our utilities. One of the things you'll see here is that we were about $1.6 million over our adopted budget. That is because of when we did the refinancing of our 2003 debt, we actually had a reserve that was sitting in the debt service fund that released that debt service reserve, and that came back to the general fund. We expected that, as you see in our original estimate, but that's why you see such a big jump from our adopted budget. Next, we'll move over to the uses side. About $8.5 million less than what was expected, but as we go through the detail, you'll see that that $8.5 million will get trimmed a little bit as we go forward. Our personnel expenses were less than $100,000 less than our estimate that we used when we prepared the budget. Supplies and services about $400,000 less. No specific area, just a little bit of savings in various departments. When we get to the services area, though, we have about $3 million in savings located here, and there's a couple of things that impact us. So first of all, we had stadium spring training ticket surcharge. That fund needs to pay for not a portion of the debt service, but needs to help the general fund in paying the debt service. So it doesn't pay the debt service directly, but it does pay a portion of the operations and maintenance costs at spring training. So some of those costs had to be moved out of the general fund and into the spring training ticket surcharge. You'll see on the transfer out side, we actually had to increase our transfer out for debt service. So it kind of offsets in that regard. Development agreement with Iris, we expected that would be paid last fiscal year. It actually was paid this fiscal year. So about $500,000 less in expenses this year, but you're going to see we have to carry that forward into 2017, and that'll come up a little bit later in the presentation. Capital expenses, about $100,000 more in operating capital than what our estimate was. You see that it's quite a bit less than what our adopted budget was. If you remember back in 2016, we adopted the budget to include a mid-decade census. We later did not do that census and move those dollars into the general capital fund so we could complete the Greenway Road construction. So that's why you see such a drop from what the adopted budget is to what our current estimate is. Transfers out. Our original estimate was $12.8 million. This obviously is the biggest single change on our uses side. So our current estimate is about $5.1 million less. However, most of this needs to be carried forward for capital purposes into next year. So we had projects within the general capital fund that were not spent in 2016. We carried those forward into 2017. We didn't need to do a transfer from the general fund to the general capital fund last fiscal year. We will need to do that next year. So we will be adjusting that as we go forward. The total balance that you see here is actually an increase of ending fund balance of $10.3 million. But as we go forward, we'll see that after we take out the carry forward of the Iris agreement, we have vehicle replacements of some long lead fire vehicles that will be carried into fiscal year 2017. And then we have the capital project carry forward of $5.5 million. That brings us to an adjusted variance of about $3.3 million. That means we have about $3.3 million more ending fund balance in the general fund than expected when we put the 2017 budget together. We do have a few items that currently are unbudgeted but are beginning to come up in conversation a little bit. First, we have an agreement, a development reimbursement for our median along Cactus Road that we will need to fund. It's about $130,000. We have the pickleball courts that were discussed during the bond presentations. That was removed from the bond, and we talked about funding that with cash going forward. So that's another item for discussion. Surprise Farms Park, we have an unfinished section at this point. We have a potential partnership with the HOA to potentially put in some infrastructure there, and they may help us out with the operating costs. So that's a thing that we're exploring now, but it would involve us putting some cash in to get the infrastructure built. Workers' compensation will have a presentation here in a couple of council meetings about the potential of self-insuring workers' compensation. That will save us operating costs going forward. However, we will have to establish a reserve, and that means we need to have some cash on hand. And last of all, when we go into the fiscal year 2018 budget, of course, we're going to have asset, vehicle, and pavement preservation needs. We're also going to come back to you and talk a little bit about reserves and maybe changing the policy on how we have our reserves set up, possibly a need for cash there, depending on how that shakes out.
Thank you, Jared. So another portion that we would like to bring to you from now and into the future is an update on the status of our grants. So earlier this spring, we consolidated the administration of our grants within the finance department. So previously, the grants writing and grants administration was separate from the financial administration. So we've consolidated that within finance, and we're finding some, I guess, good economies of scale from having it in one location. And so with that, our update on the grants for fiscal year 2016, we saw that we had a total of 18 grants awarded for about $1.3 million. And there were 15 of those were federal, 1 was state, and 2 other grants. For the actual expenditure side, we saw 30 federal grants were expended, about $2.7 million, 1 state grant for about $6,000, and 5 other for $225,000. So you'll see that we have 36 total grants expended during fiscal year 2016 for nearly $3 million. So the reason that number for the expenditures is larger than the number that was awarded is that most grants cross fiscal years. So federal fiscal year, for example, runs from October 1st through June 30th. We will see those expenditures across 2 fiscal years, or those awards that show up in one year but are spent in the next. And so we will be bringing you this report, as I said, on a quarterly basis into the future to keep up on where we are with our grants and how much we have been able to award and expend. We have upcoming items. Our year-end audit activities are underway. Our auditors will be on site next week doing some field work with us. So we'll be closing in on these results and narrowing down those numbers. We also will be bringing you some budget amendments for fiscal year 2016 year-end adjustments tonight, November 1st, at the regular city council meeting. And the other side of those on the fiscal year 2017 carry forward corrections. And so those are some of what Jared referred to earlier in the presentation. And then you will see at the next council meeting on November 15th, our year-end transfer adjustments. So per our financial policies, all initial transfers, interfund transfers from one fund to another require council approval for full transparency. And with that, we'd be happy to entertain any questions or comments you might have.
Councilmember Winters.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A good presentation, Jared and Lindsay. Really good. So it looks like that we're in pretty good shape financially. And this $500,000 from the IRS agreement, we'll see one more time next fiscal year, and then we're finished with that.
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Winters, Council has already approved the expenditure, so the only place you'll see it possibly is in the amendment that we're doing tonight to establish that. Other than that, you won't really see it come before you again.
Great. Okay. Thank you.
Councilmember Hall.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just one question. Good presentation. When the workers' comp, when we go self-insured on the workers' comp, do we envision that falling under the health insurance board that we have currently in place to be reviewed?
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Hall, we actually we're talking about the potential of doing that. It does need to be its own separate trust, separate from the Healthcare Benefits Trust Fund, but we're still going through the mechanics of whether we can use that same trust board or if we have to establish another one.
I see. Okay. Thank you.
Council, any more questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Next item.
This is a presentation and discussion pertaining to FS 16-400 Posada Lake Village Planned Area Development Minor Amendment.
Just a minor one.
Mr. Chair, members of the council. Normally I wouldn't bring you minor amendments, but this is a significant minor amendment that doesn't necessarily meet the major amendment requirements. I'll kind of go through the reasoning for that at the end, but I really wanted to just hit the highlights of the project. So kind of the background. So the Prasada, this is in reference to the Prasada development. The Prasada development was approved by the city on June 22nd, 2007. Encompassed about 3,355 acres. Of this, there's 3 distinct villages, and there's a reason why I'm calling out the 3 distinct villages, which I'll reference as well. So we have the Gateway Village, which is basically along the 303 corridor. It's about 1,200 acres, a little bit over. The Urban Village, which is between Sarville and Reams, which is about 503 acres. And then the Prasada Lake Village, which is west of Cotton Lane, straddling Cactus, which is about 1,600 acres, give or take. The reason I call it the 3 distinct villages is the way the Prasada planned area development has been manufactured, or the zoning has been created, is that each village can be amended by itself. So the Lake Village could be amended, or the Gateway Village could be amended, or the Urban Village could be amended, and wouldn't touch necessarily the other villages. Just as a background, this is kind of the Prasada. As you can see, the gateway along the 303, the Urban Village kind of there towards Marley Park, and then the Prasada Lake Village, which is the other piece that kind of gets closer to the white tanks in that area. So in September of 2015, we held a concept review meeting with the owner and the representative. Much had changed since 2006 when they originally came in for their zoning. Originally, there was one master developer of the Prasada Lake Village, which was Fulton Homes. And that was kind of the preface of kind of the way the zoning was enacted for the Prasada Lake Village, is that they had one master developer that basically would take down that property and develop the vast majority of that property. But since that time, that home builder has pulled out. So now what Prasada is looking at doing is trying to get interest from other home builders into the Lake Village itself. So at this point, they're looking at multiple builders on the project. And currently, the way the zoning requirements are in the Prasada Lake Village is that it kind of precludes them from bringing in those other builders because of the way the mechanisms and the zoning kind of work for the Prasada Lake Village portion of the development. We received a formal submittal of the amendment to the planned area development in September of 2016. And really, the major pertinent changes are all to the Prasada Lake Village. There's some other nuances that may get changed in other pieces of the document just because of the referencing, but really this is really encompassing the Lake Village itself. So kind of just some more of the background. So the Prasada PAD includes a section on what constitutes a major and minor amendment. Currently, our zoning code is silent on this, and even the previous zoning code was silent on what constitutes a major versus minor amendment to a planned area development. A lot of it's based on zoning and those kinds of things, based on interpretation. But Prasada actually had some sections in there specifically spelling out a minor versus major amendment type scenario in the full Prasada development. So as you're aware, minor amendments, staff review and approval. Major amendments, we have citizen outreach, Planning and Zoning Commission recommendation, and council approval. And again, because of the size of the Lake Village and the amendments pertaining to is one of the reasons I wanted to bring it to council's attention that we were going down this route. It's 1,600 acres. It's a significant portion of the Prasada development. However, overall, really not much is changing with the Prasada Lake Village in concept, just some major items that I'll touch on here in the next couple slides. So the proposed amendment is focused solely on the Prasada PAD Section 4, which is the Prasada Lake Village section. Again, it will touch other pieces, but for the most part, that's the meat and potatoes of the amendment. The following is the major amendments criteria per the Prasada planned area development, which is located in 9.0. So this was all approved through 2006, where basically minor amendments will include density swaps and intensity transfers that do not increase the density or intensity of any one parcel more than 20%. And then land use designation boundaries and parcel sizes are intended to be flexible and may be modified, however, by no more than 20%. And I'll later on, I'll kind of spell out how the amendments don't necessarily meet these requirements to go into a major amendment. So what they're requesting at this point, and I'm hitting on some major highlights. There are some other minor things that I know staff is working on and reviewing. I think we'll have first review comments coming out fairly soon on the submittal. But the removal of the blended neighborhood concept, And I'll get into what these mean later on in subsequent slides. Removal of the themed parks, but still maintaining the 15% open space. The addition of 4 additional architecture types to the current architecture palette that was allowed or that was looked at for the Posada Lake Village. Possible dedication of land for a city-owned and maintained park. Currently, in our Parks and Open Space Master Plan, we've identified an area in this as being a community-style park, 25, 30 acres, give or take. And that's one item we have brought up with the owners of the property that they have looked at. They have included it in the text as a possibility. It would be something that would have to be negotiated later, worked through finance, worked through other departments to make sure that all departments are on board to see that it happens. So it's not saying we're requiring a park or we're getting a park, but it says with the more further information is needed and further working together with other departments are needed. The other highlights are inclusion of age-qualified community, which could be gated, and then inclusion of a possible golf course, which would be kind of associated with the age-qualified community. And if so included, that would be included in the 15% open space for the age-qualified community, but wouldn't necessarily be included as the open space for the rest of the development. That was very important to staff, as we want to make sure that when we have portions of this that aren't age qualified, if they even become age qualified as a possibility, that we still have the amount of open space that is needed for persons with families and so forth. And we want to make sure we maintain that. And that's something that we worked very closely with SLR and the representative on this. So we'll kind of go into what each one individually means. So in the blended neighborhood concept, what it allowed for and kind of required was that there was a mixture of duplexes, single-family residential on a single street. Not necessarily even on a single street. The way the language was, it was very loose. So when you read it, it just says you need to incorporate these different things. It didn't say the amounts or the percentage or that this block could be this and this block could be that. But one of the things that arises when you require this within zoning is that it has some issues with the developer. If you have one master developer of it and one home builder, it's much easier to accomplish than if you're trying to bring in multiple home builders into the subdivision. So the other item is it's fairly hard to administer. The interpretation of it is fairly lengthy, and then it's kind of really left up between staff and the applicant or the developer kind of fighting it out as to what is a blended neighborhood. Is it this block and this block? Is it on the same street? Is it those kinds of things? So going through the review of kind of the blended neighborhood section of Posada, it does raise some issues on how it's going to be administered by the city. We currently have, as an example, one of the projects in the city where it talks about setbacks and the changes of setbacks, or even like the elevations, and making sure that this elevation and this elevation aren't the same, but then across the street the elevation can't be the same. So then when these guys get in and they bring in people that are prospective home buyers, they're saying they want this elevation on this lot, but we're saying, well, you can't have that based on the planned area development because that elevation occurs across the street or 3 houses down, and therefore you can't have that there. So these are the things where, at the time when you start developing and, you're kind of going through these processes, and it looks great on paper, but in practicality, it's very difficult and hard to administer for not only city staff, but also, people going out there and trying to buy homes. And what I will say too is that while the requirement in the PAD is being removed, it's still the ability, they still have the ability to do this. The zoning in Posada is very flexible. So if they did have someone that came in and wanted to do something like this, where they had a mixture of duplexes, single family, and those kinds of things all kind of intermingling on a single street, they have the ability to do so. So what it does is it still offers them the opportunity, but it just removes the requirement. So removal of the theme parks. So currently in the Posada Lakes PAD, there was multiple themed parks. One was a children's park, one was an aquatics park, one was a sports park, one was a teen park. All of those parks would have been maintained by the HOA. But what was interesting was, as an example, so the children's park would be located in the far north. So people located in the far southeasterly portion of the development, to go to the children's park would have to go all the way up there. And then they had a teen park, and those, so again, when you look at it from a master development aspect, it makes sense However, when you start looking at different home builders and bringing in different products and those kinds of things, it really didn't, because everyone's having to traverse all over the community to go to different parks that are made for them, made special for them. Again, as I said, it's kind of made sense when there was one developer, but now that it's probably going to be broken up between multiple developers in the Prasada PAD or Prasada development, it just doesn't make a lot of sense to have the themed parks in place. So as another item, so there was an addition of 4 architectural types to the architectural theme: craftsman, ranch, cottage, farmhouse. The original PAD included 8 different types, as you can see: Spanish colonial, Monterey, Mediterranean, Taliante. I believe that's I don't know how to say that. Tuscany, territorial ranch, prairie, bungalow. It came up on my spell check too, by the way. So, here's kind of the original ones that were in there: Spanish colonial, Monterey, Mediterranean, kind of the whatever that is. Tuscany, territorial ranch, prairie style, bungalow. These are the 8 that were originally included. Through some of their meetings with other home builders and so forth, they ended up including the following 4, which is more of a craftsman style, ranch style, cottage style, and farmhouse style. So ultimately what they've done is actually increased the diversity. They could be increasing the diversity with the housing types within the Prasada Lake Village, even more so than what the original PAD had. Because as staff, when we review it, we review it based on, is it one of the 8? No, then we have to knock it out. So now that we have these 4 others, we have more of a multitude, more of a menu to kind of choose from, so that we can work with them on it. So another proposal is inclusion of a possible age qualified. Again, it's possible, it's just giving them the possibility. However, what needs to be stated too is that they have this possibility without actually coming before into a minor amendment, or even a major amendment for that aspect. Per the revised statutes, we have some zoning regulations under the zoning regulations section. You can establish an age-specific community zoning district. And those zoning districts, they're typically overlays over existing zoning that requires a certain age that's associated with that can move into that area. So this statute was actually reflected in the previous City of Surprise Zoning Code, Title 17. We actually had a section that was the age restricted overlay. And as an example, there's a couple communities within Surprise that actually have that age restricted overlay. When the SUDC was updated, this was left out. Whether it was intentional or unintentional, it was left out of the SUDC. So therefore, what it becomes is we don't have necessarily the same. We don't have the same controls under the SUDC that we had under the Title 17 ordinance to restrict age restricted types of, or even have a public hearing on an age restricted type development. So really, what anyone can do, what any developer could do, is they could do this within their CC&Rs. What they're proposing is just to be upfront that a portion of this could be age restricted. It may not be, but they just want to be upfront about the possibility of it going that way. So, but as in the future, what we're looking at, this is one of the items on our wall that we've been adding different items on the SUDC of how we're going to look at bringing it to P&Z and council, is that we're going to be working to include age restricted zoning district in the update to the SUDC, so that ultimately everyone knows that if one comes in, then you know it along the way, and you have more of a say in kind of how that age restriction is and so forth. So based upon the general request, we have the removal of the blended neighborhood, removal of the theme parks, maintaining the 15% open space, inclusion of new architecture, age-restricted possibility, a possible golf course. The proposal as submitted does not swap density on any parcel by more than 20%, and it does not modify boundaries and or parcel sizes by more than 20%. So at this point, when we reviewed it, staff has basically determined it to be a minor amendment. Granted, it's a large development, but the thresholds as presented and as approved in the PAD have not been met in this case. So therefore, again, one of the reasons I wanted to bring it in front of council is that with something this significant, that you should all be definitely aware of it, so that you're not surprised later on. And I wanted to, bring it up to you, to the council to, provide comments and feedback and so forth. So with that said, if I have any questions, I'll be happy to answer those.
Councilmember Hall.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let's see, where should I start? Let's start with the density. I'm just curious on this. The 20% swap, that doesn't impact the overall density?
No, in fact.
And what is the overall density? 3?
Chairman or Chair, Councilmember Hall.
4.51.
4.7.
4.7. You knew that, John? Wow.
I have it written down.
Okay. I'm impressed.
Mr. Gilbert.
And then, so it doesn't, when they swap between parcels, it doesn't affect the overall 4.7, is what you're saying.
Chair, Councilmember, there's no swap going on right now. So they're not actually swapping any density at this point.
But if they did
over the 20%, then staff would catch and go. To be able to do that, you'd have to go through a major amendment to the zoning.
Okay, but like, you got to help me with it. Let's do an example.
Okay.
Okay, so there's 100 acre property, and they want to do a swap on this 100 acre property. Okay, so it's right now it's 4.7. Okay, and they want to do let's say 5.2. Okay, so would that half a unit dilute another parcel? So it'd be 4.2 on another parcel? That's what I'm trying. What I'm trying to get at. In other words, either that, or we're just blanketing saying a 20% increase over the whole thing.
That council member, with the way that the amendment structure is in the PAD, there is some left up to some interpretation. So we would look at making sure the max density didn't increase. So theoretically, that could happen. So if they had 4.5, they want to go up to 5.2. We'd have to look at where we're going to make up that other 0.8 in another section of the the development.
And they understand that. You understand that, Paul? Yeah. Okay. And then on the 4 types of housing products we talked about, Eric, were you? I want to make sure I'm clear. That's 4 more in addition to the
8. Chair.
So a total of 12.
Correct.
Gotcha. Okay, good. I like that. Then the 8, the golf course. I'm figuring the golf course is going to be 10 acres per hole, right? So that's close to 200 acres. So if the 15% is over the 1,600 acres, then that means there's 240 acres of open space. So the golf course absorbs about between 180 and 200 acres of that 240.
Chair, council member, so it would absorb a portion of it. So in the if they do go with an age qualified portion of the community, that golf course would account for some of the open space required in that portion, 15% of that portion. The rest of the subdivision would still have to have 15% open space.
Oh, I see. So so it wouldn't apply to the whole Lake Village. It would just apply to that age qualified. Okay. All right. And then on age qualified, I'm just curious, Sun City Grand started at 45 or 55, but then they amended their documents to go to 45 because there is a large market that doesn't have children that are 45. And I would really encourage that. Okay, because the age qualified, what the age qualified says in the CCNRs is there's no children unless they're visiting, right?
Correct, Chair. Correct.
And so I'm just kind of giving you some feedback that I think we really ought to look at age 45 being the minimum.
Chair, council member, it's something we can definitely put in our comments to the applicant.
And then I'd like Paul to come up and talk a little bit about this overall project, how he sees it going and what's going on here. You got plenty of time, Paul.
Yeah, I know. Kind of refreshing. Is that all right, Mayor? Okay. For your record, my name is Paul Gilbert, 701 North 44th Street in Phoenix. We're real excited about this project. We think what we're proposing improves it in every way. And I want to talk a little bit about the density. One of the lodestars that we have focused on is that we're not increasing by 1 unit the total density. So if we put more density on one parcel, we lower it on another.
Okay.
So the overall density stays exactly the same as was approved.
Okay.
And that's one of the reasons why we felt comfortable advocating this be a minor amendment. The other thing that I wanted to talk about just briefly is the lakes are still an integral part of this plan. Eric couldn't cover everything, but this was known as the Lakes Village, and it still will be lakes. So we're going to have basically, the lakes will be in a little different configuration, but we're going to have lakes, and that will be an integral part of this development. And we have entered into an agreement with the city of Surprise so we can fill these lakes with affluent. We've already extended the lines in part to accommodate these lakes, but they will be filled entirely with affluent from Surprise.
I see.
So that
when you do that golf course, it gives people the opportunity to hit a ball into the lake.
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
That they will.
Okay.
But we've appreciated the working with the staff. They've made some good suggestions, and we've, I think, incorporated most of what they recommended. And I think we're here in a posture of bringing a very exciting project forward. It's been a long time coming, but I think we're there, and we're going to see some houses coming up soon there.
Well, good.
So
Well, thanks,
you.
Paul. I just and I know I really want to commend Eric and his group working with you on this.
Yeah,
And I know they put in a lot of time
They have.
with you, right?
they have,
And
absolutely.
we got a great staff, don't we?
Absolutely.
I'm with you. Okay,
Now,
thanks, Paul.
I don't know about the city attorney, but no.
Yeah,
I was
well, you know.
just seeing if he was awake. So
Anyway.
thank you very much.
Okay, thanks, Paul.
Councilmember Villanueva.
Yes. I kind of had the same concern about the retirement age because, and I just wondered how many more. I don't have anything against retirement people. I just want to make that sure. But how many more retirement communities are we going to have in our area? But I totally agree to go down on the age limit because there's a lot of young couples.
Yep.
Like you said, there's a lot of young couples that do live in Sun City Grant, right? And there's a lot of couples that even live in our community that would like to live in a retirement community, but they are young. So I do have a concern about that. Talking about the lakes, is that a regular lake like we have here in our park, or is that a lake just for the golf course?
Chair, Councilmember Villanueva, I think it remains to be seen at this point. I would assume, associated with the golf course, there'd probably be some lakes. It's really going to depend on how the project develops. We just know that there is the ability for them to have lakes. We have infrastructure in for them to have it to utilize affluent. And they have committed that they will be moving forward with that. How they'll be shaped and where they'll be located remains to be seen at this point.
Okay, I just know there's so many people that enjoy the lakes here, and that would be nice for the community to have something like that. Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Winters.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm really happy and excited to see this sleeping giant is starting to wake up. That's great. I got a question for you, Eric. Why did Fulton Homes pull out of the agreement? Do you have any feelings on that?
Chair, Councilmember, I think it was just 2006 and the housing boom and bust. Ultimately, I think the applicant would be better to answer that. But I wouldn't necessarily point to one individual item.
Okay, so are there going to be a number of developers in that project now?
I think that's the goal, is to bring in, the way that home builders are buying now, they're not buying that larger tracts usually at that, 1,600 acres all at once. So there's the possibility of a few different home builders in there. Mm-hmm. But I don't know if you want
to. Thank you again, Paul Gilbert. The Fulton Homes and the owner brought this project forward at the absolute zenith of the housing market. Everything was going well. I mean, you could throw your dart at a board and make money. I mean, it was just, things were just booming. And I miss those days. I don't think they're coming back, unfortunately. So they came in, we signed everything up, got approval right at the time that the housing market just crashed. I mean, it was a precipitous crash that just hit everything all across the board, everywhere here in Arizona, and really hit hard here. And so it didn't make sense for Fulton to go forward with that housing project. And in fact, I would submit to you, Mayor Williams and Councilman Winters, you'll see very, very few developers take on acreage of this size again. It's almost impossible to finance. And one of the criticisms that caused the housing market to fall is developers got too much land tied up. It was too ambitious, and they couldn't make the payments.
So they're land poor.
Yes, that's right. So basically, in a nutshell, that's why Fulton backed down. And Fulton could well be one of the developers, but I think to your question directly, this will now be built by a series of developers instead of just one master developer.
Well, one more thing. I like the idea of not including that golf course as open space and the rest of the development, because we're short on open space as it is. We need
that's a good point, and we agree with that, because if the golf course is there, the primary users will be the age-qualified people. So it would be unfair to count that as open space for the whole project. We get that, and we're on board with that. Now,
thanks, Paul.
I've got one. May I backtrack a bit, Mayor, with an answer or address one other comment that's been made? In order to qualify as age restricted, we've got to have 85% or 80%, I think it is, of our homes 55 restricted there. So that's an impediment that we face going forward. Just wanted you to be aware of that.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Hayden.
I had one question. Was the configuration the same now as it was when you did it previously?
I'm sorry, would you mind repeating the question, Councilman Hayden?
Is the configuration the same now as it was when you originally did this a few years ago?
Yes. The overall boundaries of the project have stayed exactly the same. That hasn't changed. Now, the configuration of the individual lots inside will change from what we originally proposed. But what we originally proposed was a conceptual plan only. So we weren't stuck with those exact configurations. But it's the same boundary, same acreage, same square footage, same everything.
Councilmember Villanueva.
You mentioned that you were going to have several developers.
Yes.
But are they going to stick with the same type of homes, all of them?
We will have a series of developers, but all of them will have to conform to the 12 architectural designs, basically, that are approved as part of the PAD and that Eric showed you on his presentation.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
My pleasure.
All right, I got a couple questions. First, I agree. This is exciting that we're even talking about moving this project forward. This is just a game-changing project for our community. So very excited that we're even having this discussion, 9-10 years later. The traffic, is anything changing in terms of the circulation plan?
Chair.
As traffic is a considerable issue in this area now, obviously, we don't have the infrastructure there.
Chair, Council, there could, depending on if there's an age-qualified portion and gating of some of the roads, there could be. Overall, the circulation plan wasn't amended as submitted.
Okay. And so, obviously, and I know the developers understand that there's multiple high schools in that area, an elementary school, and then anytime we continue to develop, that's another question of where are we sending kids to school and how are we getting them there and those types of things. And then just ingress, egress in and out of that area. So based on the minor amendment, nothing changes there, but just a quick question on that. And then the parks, obviously we're taking away those themes. Those themes were almost, and I'm assuming they're neighborhood, they're HOA parks, they're not city parks. However, if the city partners or land is provided to the city for a community park, is that applied to open space in this area? Does that apply?
Chair, Council, yes, that would apply. That's one of the items that we looked at with the multiple neighborhood parks. We had talked about, our plan, the Parks and Open Space Master Plan says we need a community park in this area. And that's an item that if they did donate that property, that would count towards the overall open space of the project.
Okay. And then just in terms of, in looking at, obviously looking at the project as a whole, is there any change in that commercial piece? We're just talking about residential. Is there any change in that commercial piece, either in Posada Lake Village or in other aspects of the development?
Chair, Council, there's no other changes in the urban village or the 303 corridor or the Gateway Village. Now, there are some other pieces within the PAD that there's different references to the Lake Village that we're trying to work on as well, but nothing that would affect overall, those zoning aspects of those two villages.
Okay, and then those 12 types of homes that we were looking at, those renderings, is that driven by the market? Or is that going to be this section? You're going to have a choice of these 4 style homes. How do we decide of those 12 choices now? What goes where, or is it just simply customer driven, market driven?
Chair, Council, I'll try to answer that as best I can, but it might be better answered by Paul. I would assume that this is kind of a menu that the home builders can choose from. However, that said, I know SLR is committed to making sure that this is a fantastic community and that the product style is going to be very nice. So I would assume that when they're looking in, they're vetting home builders, they're also looking at, well, we don't want all Spanish colonial and we don't want all this. We want a mixture of these or what have you. But sure. Ultimately, it would kind of be up to I think a lot of the SLR and kind of the city staff review on, what it is. But I'll kind of defer to Paul.
We consulted with the home building community. So we didn't do this in a vacuum.
Sure.
And they were the ones that suggested to us that we needed more variety, and that made sense, particularly when we didn't have one master developer anymore. So we reached out to the home building community. They gave us that input. We ran it by them. We ran it by our land planner. So we very carefully selected this variety that is market-driven.
Appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Gilbert. Council, any more questions? Councilmember Hall.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I got a question. Maybe Paul could probably be the best answer, but you can chime in too, Eric. I'm just curious on this overall development is going to be called Lake Village.
Correct.
Okay.
Posada Lake Village.
Posada Lake Village. Okay, so that is going to be a standalone entity, so to speak, and the developments within that are going to be underneath this organization, so to speak. Right?
Correct.
Okay.
That's
so as a buyer,
correct.
what I'm getting at, Paul, as a buyer in a home in this community, there's going to be 2 fees. There's going to be one to the smaller developer, whoever that is, ABC Builder, right? You're going to have some common area, blah, 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 within that development, but you're also going to have a master development, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so there's going to be 2 different HOA.
Yeah, there will be
correct? No, okay.
There will be a master. We haven't drafted the CCNRs yet, but I think our vision at this point is there will be a master association governing the whole thing.
Right.
And then there will be sub-associations for each individual developer.
Gotcha.
And there no doubt will be some contributions to the master association.
Okay.
From the sub-associations.
All right. And then, so when you're buying into that master, so to speak, with this sub-association, will the master disclose all what's going to be included in that whole area? So I, as a buyer, know I'm not only just buying into this sub-association, that I'm part of this master that includes this lake and that park and et cetera? Is that from a marketing standpoint? Yeah. That's what you're going. Okay.
Absolutely, we're required by state law to register, and we have to state in the real estate filing that we make the homeowners association, the fees, and what fees will be paid. So all that will be disclosed, and we'll be very tenacious about doing that. No home builder worth his salt would not disclose those kind of restrictions and obligations going forward.
Okay, because it's such a big development, Paul.
It is.
Okay, that I just want to make sure that you're thinking through the disclosure part of this.
Okay.
Because we don't need buyers buying into something they're not getting any value for. You see what I'm saying?
I do. That's a sagacious comment, and we'll honor it. We're on board with
sagacious
that.
I'm writing it down right now.
It's good.
Sagacious. Silent.
Now you know.
Okay. Thanks.
Councilmember Winters.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just was wondering, Paul, or someone out there might have an answer for me. What is going to be the medium price of these homes? Any idea?
Mayor and Councilman Williams, no. These homes have not been priced yet, and it would be, I was going to say precipitous, but they'll make fun of that word too, so I won't use it.
Precipitous.
But it would be early for us to indicate what those prices would be.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any more questions from the council? Thank you, Mr. Gilbert. Thank you, Mr. Fitzer.
Mr. Chair, I just have one other comment. Sagacious means having or shown keen mental discernment.
That's
And
outstanding.
good judgment. Okay.
All right. You learned something there. Well, we have another hour and 8 minutes to the meeting, so I've got a few other questions. What's the no, I'm just kidding. Just kidding. City Clerk, any other items? All right.
That is it.
Motion to adjourn.
Make a motion, we adjourn.
Second.
Meeting's adjourned.